There's so many videos on the internet about how to remove these tonsil stones, but not many people talk about what causes them and how to prevent even getting them. So what even are tonsil stones? So tonsil stones are those like whitish gray little deposits that form on people's tonsils. And they're usually made up of a combination of like bacteria, food particles, mucus, and dead cells that all sort of cluster together and harden and calcify onto your tonsils. So sometimes they can be really small, and sometimes they can be really big, but you've probably seen different videos of people removing them from their own tonsils. Now, one of the biggest problems that tonsil stones cause is bad breath or halitosis. People who have tonsil stones have terrible breath. But you can also get symptoms like having a sore throat, having a hard time swallowing, or a lot of coughing. Now, usually when it comes to removing them, people have this gentle way of removing them at home, but sometimes people need to get a surgery to get their tonsils removed. Now, those things might work, but if you keep having to remove them, that can get really annoying, and you're gonna have that persistent bad breath if they keep coming back. Or if you have to get your tonsils removed, well, that may solve the problem with your tonsil stones, but that could lead to other issues, and we're gonna get into that more in this video too. So I'm gonna go over some ways to prevent you from getting tonsil stones, and I'm also gonna go over the #1 thing you can start doing to help prevent you from getting tonsil stones that a lot of people do not talk about, and that involves your breathing. So I'm gonna go over that more in the later part of this video because your breathing ties into a lot of the other stuff I'm gonna mention. So make sure you stick around. So one simple thing you gotta start doing to prevent getting tonsil stones is having good oral hygiene. So that means 3 things: brushing your teeth twice a day, flossing every day, and going to your dentist every 6 months. You can also add in a non-alcohol mouthwash because all of these things are just going to reduce the bacteria load in your mouth and reduce the likelihood of one of those tonsil stones forming. Now, the second thing you can start doing is focusing on your diet. Specifically, focus on eating less sugar and less refined carbs because the more that you introduce these foods into your mouth, the more you give these bacteria food to kind of cling onto because those bacteria like feeding on those sugars. Now, those two are some of the most basic things you can start doing. But the other things that cause tonsil stones are a little bit harder to correct. These are things like having chronic tonsil inflammations or infections. I mean, how do you prevent yourself from getting sick? But if you are sick and your tonsils are enlarged and they're always inflamed, then you're going to be way more likely to get these tonsil stones. And also having excessive mucus production. I mean, how do you stop yourself from having allergies or sinus infections? But both of these contribute to having more mucus and more of that postnasal drip, which contribute more to that tonsil stone, like the stuff that builds up into those tonsil stones. Now, this all brings us to the next thing, which I think is the most important thing to prevent you from getting tonsil stones, and that is focusing on your breathing. The #1 cause of having really enlarged tonsils and these tonsil stones is excessive breathing through your mouth. Normal breathing is done in and out through your nose. If instead you were always breathing through your mouth, then you're gonna have really dry tissues. Your mouth is gonna be really dry, and also the pharyngeal tissues, the tissues behind your mouth, like more in your throat and around your tonsils, are gonna be dry. And that's gonna lead them to be way more inflamed and more likely to get tonsil stones and tonsil infections. You know when you wake up in the morning and your mouth has been open and you've been drooling on your pillow and you smell your breath and it just smells terrible? Well, that's because you've been breathing through your mouth all night long and you're drying up all that saliva. Your saliva is a natural barrier. It's basically like a bodyguard for your teeth and your gums, but also all the tissues in your throat and your tonsils, because your saliva has a lot of antibacterial properties. So if you don't have that saliva kind of protecting everything, then you're gonna be way more likely to have bacteria that infiltrate and cause problems and bad breath. Now instead, if you're always breathing through your nose, then you're gonna get a lot of benefits that will prevent you from getting tonsil stones. So your nose kind of acts like a filter to the air. So it'll warm up the air and it'll make it similar to your body temperature so that by the time it reaches your lungs, then it's going to be a lot more gentle on your lungs and it's going to cause less inflammation. It also kind of humidifies and adds moisture to the air before it reaches your lungs. Again, making it more gentle and also making everything less dry. Your nose also filters out different dust and particles and eliminates about 98 to 99% of viruses and bacteria before it enters your lungs. So that means you're going to be way less likely to get sick, you're going to be way less likely to have allergies, and other problems that cause more mucus and more bacteria buildup. You also get a molecule called nitric oxide when you breathe through your nose. So as you inhale through your nose, this air enters your paranasal sinuses. And once that air passes there, you get this molecule called nitric oxide, which does two things. It's a vasodilator and also an antibacterial. So that means that first of all, having more nitric oxide will help the gas exchange in your lungs. So as the air enters your lungs, as these blood vessels are more dilated, they're able to transport more oxygen more efficiently, so you're able to get more oxygen delivered to your cells and your organs. But also having this nitric oxide around, especially in that nasopharynx area, will prevent tonsil and adenoid infections because you have this antibacterial molecule that is building up over there that's going to be basically protecting your tonsils and your adenoids. Now, another benefit you get when you're breathing through your nose, and this one you're going to have to focus a little bit more, is engaging your diaphragm. When people breathe through their mouth, they usually only breathe with the upper half of their chest and their lungs, so they never really engage their diaphragm. When you breathe through your nose, it naturally helps you engage your diaphragm. But if you also focus on engaging your diaphragm when you're breathing, then this is also going to prevent tonsil infections. The reason why is your tonsil and adenoids are part of your lymphatic tissues. So your lymphatic system is basically a drainage system. So you have this circulatory system which basically carries this blood to your tissues, and then at that point it turns into lymph, and this is when it becomes your lymphatic system, which basically carries it back to your circulatory system. But if your lymphatic system isn't properly draining, then a lot of your lymph tissues are going to be swollen. So if you're not draining your tonsil and your adenoids, then they're going to be more likely to be swollen and more likely to get those tonsil stones. Now, what does your diaphragm have to do with this? Well, your diaphragm is one of the main muscles that helps drive your lymph throughout your body. So if you're engaging your diaphragm, that means you're going to also be helping drain the lymph throughout your whole body. So next time you're breathing, try to focus on sticking that belly out a little bit. Now, engaging your diaphragm can be a little bit more complicated than that. So if you're kind of struggling engaging your diaphragm when you're breathing, I did make another video where I went more into detail on that. So I'm putting a link in the description below, so make sure you check that out. Now, the last benefit that you get from breathing through your nose that I wanted to talk about is CO2 regulation. When you breathe in and out through your mouth really quickly, then you're draining your body of a lot of your carbon dioxide, because the more quickly that you are breathing, then the less CO2 you're going to have in your body. Because we don't get CO2 from our air. Our air has about 21% oxygen in it, but it only has like 0.03% of CO2. We only get CO2 that's produced in our body. So if we're taking really quick breaths, then we're not giving time for that CO2 to build up in our body. Now, this can become a problem because a lot of people think that CO2 is a waste product. But if you don't have enough CO2, then first of all, you're not going to get any oxygen. Because yeah, that oxygen might be going into your lungs, but in order for that oxygen to go from your lungs and be actually delivered to your cells, like the cells in your brain, then you need to have enough CO2 built up so that oxygen can actually detach and go to your cells. This is actually something called the Bohr effect. But the main thing I wanted to talk about in regards to this video is if you don't have enough CO2, then you're going to have a lot more mucus because you have these receptors in your brain. And if they sense that your CO2 levels are a little too low, then they're going to produce more mucus in your nose. Because if your CO2 levels drop too low, then your blood pH is going to be off and you could potentially die. So your body's going to do anything to help maintain these CO2 levels. So it starts producing more of this mucus to help try to slow down your breathing to try to retain a lot of that CO2. But the problem is if you keep breathing through your mouth, then you're going to constantly be in this cycle where you're going to have too low levels of CO2 and also too much mucus. So if instead you start transitioning to only breathing through your nose, then you're going to slowly start increasing your CO2 levels to a more normal level, and then slowly that mucus in your nose and your sinus area is going to come down. And again, having less mucus means having less tonsil stones. Now you might be wondering, well, how the heck am I supposed to start breathing through my nose if I have too much mucus? Well, there's a simple exercise you can start doing to unblock your nose. So all you got to do is first take a quick inhale and exhale, and then after the exhale, you're going to hold your breath, and start bobbing your head back and forth, or you can jog in place, or you can even walk. And you're gonna keep doing that until you have this strong urge to breathe. Now that's the key word here, a strong urge to breathe. You don't wanna be basically dying to take your next breath because then you held your breath too long. Once you have that strong urge to breathe, then you're gonna recover by breathing through your nose only. You're gonna notice that your nose is gonna open up a little bit. And for that 1 minute, just breathe through your nose normally, and then you're gonna repeat this exercise a total of 6 times. So it'll look kind of like this. That's if I was bobbing my head. I can also start jogging in place like this. And then after I'm done, I'm gonna recover by breathing through my nose, and then I'm gonna repeat it again a total of 6 times. After you're done with this, you should be able to breathe through your nose again. Now, if your nose has been dormant for a long time and you have a lot of this leftover mucus buildup, you might get a lot of drainage. So you might have to keep draining your sinuses and keep blowing your nose to help keeping your nose clean, and then you might have to repeat this exercise multiple times. Eventually, maybe after a couple weeks, once all that drainage and all that mucus kind of comes out, if you keep up with this nose breathing, then it should really clear up and you should have a lot easier time breathing through your nose. Now, if this didn't do enough for you, I did make another video where I went into more detail on how to unblock your nose, so I'm putting a link in the description below, so make sure you check that out. But the last tip I have to never get these tonsil stones is to start only breathing through your nose all night long as well. It doesn't only help if you breathe through your nose during the daytime, you also have to do it at nighttime. So the way I do this is I use a 3M micropore paper tape, which is basically this medical grade tape, and I just put a strip of that over my lips at night, and I basically just tape my mouth shut. Now again, before you do this, make sure that you're able to breathe through your nose in the first place. And you can also try one of those nasal dilator strips along with this mouth tape to help encourage you to breathe through your nose and make it a little bit easier. Did you know that your tongue is responsible for more than just tasting your food? Your tongue also plays a part in how you breathe, how you eat, how you talk, your posture, and also how crooked your teeth are. So if you have something called a tongue tie or ankylosing, it can really limit the freedom of movement of your